Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm doing my 14.24 support tier list. So visual content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a couple of changes towards the support role of this patch. We saw an adjustment towards Poppy. We saw a huge buff towards Rare. We saw a minor buff towards Yumi, albeit did help her. And we saw some tags to some other champions, the likes of Swain and LeBlanc got a bit weaker. They received direct nerfs. And then I've shifted some other things around and removed some relatively unpopular champions. So the D tier is going to consist of 5 of the same champions. The 6th was Yumi, she moves up, but MF, Ashe still heavily underperform in the support role. I still think Ashe can theoretically have a place as being a very lane dominant AD carry, and if you can enable her to be like effective throughout the game, like playing around her pick potential, playing around her vision control, her slows, her early like damage, and then you obviously translating that into leads and stuff. Ashe can have value. I think MF is a lot more conditional. Obviously, primarily only played in like gold and below as like a caster mage in the bot lane or in the support role rather. It's not in a great spot at the moment. BAP ratios have been nerfed, albeit they are better than where they had been for a while, but the itemization just isn't as good for her at the moment, and she's definitely suffering from that as a result. The other picks here are Veigar, who obviously is usually only played with the likes of Ziggs AD bot lane, but still isn't particularly performant in those spaces. Malphite can function here. Obviously, it was also pretty gimmicky and mostly played with Yasuo. That is like the knock-up kind of value of this pick. He can still work as a harass mage in the bot lane, where you're just like Q poking someone to try and move them out of lane. And into ADCs with a lack of sustain or are vulnerable to the likes of a Yasuo Malphite combo, he can function here. So I think like Ashe and Malphite can have more value in certain aspects, so they're not as like low down as the other two picks in my opinion. Ziggs is the opposite, where Ziggs with Veigar is where you'd like Ziggs support with Veigar ADC, where you're using the W to bot them into the cage, so Veigar can more consistently output its damage. Also kind of bad, it's not that performant even when you have the specific pairing. And then yeah, those are picks for the D tier. Yumi moves up to the C tier then. She got buffed this patch. It helps people who were playing Yumi wrong in the previous patch. It helps the Qmax Yumi players. Obviously the correct way to play Yumi previously was to alternate points between W and E, getting as much value out of those abilities as possible. The Q, albeit does have high base damage and even higher base damage now, it goes all the way up to 380 once you have all the points in the ability. It's just not as consistent, and you're not really playing Yumi as much for her damage, albeit it is a nice thing to have, and if you are consistently tagging someone and people are giving you these opportunities, it can have value. It was never really like the sole purpose of the champion, but it's better now. She scales obviously better with these changes. That does help her in that aspect, and I believe she now sits as a C tier pick. She's still very conditional. I don't think this champion can almost. You need to pick her in the right spots to really ever have value. The likes of like on-hit marksmen traditionally are the ones you are usually playing her with, or marksmen who can really comfortably abuse the full aspect and range of her kit. Traditionally high attack speed marksman, which then leads back to on-hit marksman. So Yumi, yeah, good in those aspects, but still struggling in regards to the rest of the support pool. Amumu still sees play rate or play a player base within the support role. He is weaker than he has been in the past. They did tag support Amumu back along. They then obviously tagged him more recently. He is less performant. He also doesn't have access to things like Radiant Virtue, Even Shroud, and that hurts him a lot within the support role. His itemization just isn't as good here. You can opt into things like Zeke's and still find success, but not to the same extent as you would have been able to in the past. He's obviously primarily going to come out and see play when you're pairing him with like an MF, where MF wants champions to be held within her combos to output as much DPS as possible. He sits as more of a C tier pick at the moment. Renata is the final champion within the C tier. I was thinking of moving Swain down here, but I think he slightly holds on to his a spot within the B tier. He was obviously my A tier in the previous patch, which might have been an oversight on the champion, but I'll discuss that in a second. For now, Renata, obviously a fan favorite within, I say fan favorite, she's not very popular whatsoever, but she is very much paired with like Callista or Marksman, which can kind of abuse her steroids, and the fact that she can function really well with traditionally she is a really good competitive pick. She has good like zoning control, she synergizes well with a lot of the champs which are like deemed viable there, and that does give her presence and like strength there. I think this is what mainly prohibits Renata from being buffed for the average player, which is unfortunate. Whether they end up doing some tweaking at some point, it'll be interesting to see. But if you want to have success in Renata, I'd recommend learning her alongside pairings like, your Varuses, your Callistas, especially if you have someone who is like plays these champions proficiently. Obviously, they are harder to play champions, and more traditionally things I would recommend avoiding, especially in the lower ranks. Moving on to the B tier, then we have some of your favourites, like your Nautiluses, your Blitzcranks. These champions are deemed frustrating for their hooks and then their ability to kind of set up plays for their allies, and that can, albeit not, it'd be really nice and like really valuable as like a high elo aspect. These champions are better in high elo. That has been recognized for a while. The champions which enable your carry to do a better job at what they want to do tend to perform better there. They give up a lot of solo agency, so other people can have more strength within the game. I think if you want to play these champions, they can still be very valuable, and if you can find the right spots into champions which are lower mobility, or you really value the point and click of like a Nautilus ultimate, or the pressure of holding a Blitzcrank queue, these champions do have good spots. But like, by all means, I really do recommend learning these picks, but they are overall what I would consider less performant than some of the picks I have higher than them, but you can still definitely find the spots for them to function. Alistar is a great engage support, but can find issues in consistency and bad pairings. You want to run him alongside the likes of a Tristana and Samira, who are two champions I think are slightly on the weaker side at the moment. Thus, I wouldn't really recommend playing Alistar. He can function with other duos, of course, and as a standalone pick, there is still value to this champion if you are looking for someone with engage, but he's a bit lower down at the moment, in my opinion. Pyke is an incredibly strong elite skewed support. He really aggressively values his early game. Like, you need to abuse this champion's early game strengths and snowballing value. If you don't, this champion's really bad. But if you take that strength early on and then run with it, he can be a really powerful and potent pick, especially if you're running him alongside a marksman who really understands the strengths of Pyke. He's weaker in low elo though. That is going to be the problem with his champion. He is, games go longer in low elo, and Pyke will struggle for more of the game duration, especially if people are just unwilling to close out winning spots. Seraphine, I have lower down at the moment. She's definitely struggling a bit more as a support option. The 10% AP ratio nerf on Q really hurt her ability to consistently trade. Or I say trade. It hurts her overall damage output. She was already underperforming as a support. Like, she had just about reached like the middle point of being like someone who can function well in certain spots, but then the nerf, primarily obviously targeted towards bot lane Seraphine, hurts her as a support role. I'd say she's slightly under the bar at the moment, sits as more of a B tier pick, but can still definitely have strengths in her slows, her CC, her shielding and healing, and the fact that she can output some level of damage, albeit not as much as she used to be able to do. Thresh is a very skill dependent champion, and it could honestly probably be dropped down to the C tier, but I still think Thresh is better than he has been in the past. They've really tried to make an effort to unelite skew this champion, and to an extent it's better. Like, he is no longer as egregiously elite skewed, but he's not really great across all the ranks at the moment. He's definitely what I would consider slightly under the bar as well. First, I'm going to have him within the B tier. I was going to talk about Swain, and I'll do it now. Swain is a lot weaker with the nerfs. Swain was already underperforming as a support. He was thriving quite a bit in mid and bot lane. He was okay in top. You could make him function there, especially into like tank matchups or champions which didn't really have the tools to respond to the pick. But in the support role, it's going to continue to be what looks to be his weakest of the options, and I have him as like a low B, possibly even C tier option. It'll be kind of interesting to see where he lands long term. Obviously, things are going to shift going to next patch though, so maybe he will go up, but I believe this champion is a current low B tier option. Nico, Since it's a B tier pick, she can still have a lot of value, and like her CC, her early game damage, her W, her ultimate, all really valuable tools which can like give her different ways to play the game. Like you can work as like an enabler within team fights where you can land like multi-man pop blossoms and be really valuable. Her snare can also be a great pick tool. Her early game is very strong. Like people know that if you're able to consistently rotate double Qs with like electrocute or things like airy, she can be quite oppressive as a laner. You can like establish advantages there, and I think there is definitely strength for that. The skills obviously come in from like utilizing Nico's W effectively, whether that's to manipulate things around the map like turret aggro or like pattern like behavior patterns. It can all like really enable this champion to shine. But I do have her as a B tier pick at the moment. She isn't. I think she can have value, but not quite as much as some of the other options, especially if you don't play the pick at the moment. Morgana's here. Her inconsistency really prohibits her from being a higher tier option. I don't think she's bad at the moment. I think she is slightly under the bar, especially for what is probably deemed a low elo pick more than anything. But her snare can be really valuable if you do have the setup. Her W is a pretty fake ability in support. That is just something which is going to be the case. But if you're running things like, there's like different ways you can play Morgana. You can play her as like a damage outputter with things like Leandries and possibly even Blackfire Torch and Violet if you're looking for a bit more utility. Or you can play her with like Shredia and just utilize that CC and her ability to just run at people with ultimate. And there can be an oppressive nature to that. So I think that Morgana, albeit is perceived as quite bad at the moment, is probably be a bit stronger in perception, but still not something I would deem like really good and like something you should consistently play outside of like maybe spots where you can really enable the full value of her kit. High midding I have in the beta. So I think this champion's weaker than he was previously in support. Obviously, we all remember the really oppressive high midding with like turrets, which felt basically indestructible and could enable him to like consistently push the wave. It's not that egregious anymore. But if you're able to get early kills and AP, this champion can output a huge amount of damage, and his ability to perma shove waves, look for objectives, look for like roams, can really be a good thing to play around and like a real strength of the champion. So I do think he can definitely shine in those aspects. Pantheon, solid B tier pick. I've removed Camille now. She's basically just lost all of her play rate in the support role. Pantheon is what I'd recommend as the really aggressive AD option, especially if you are lower elo. He can be a bit more accessible than something like a Pyke. I still don't think he's amazing, which is why I have him slightly like all in the same tier as the Pyke. I think Pyke scales considerably more aggressively when with like mastery into him. I think Pantheon can still function though, like he can still be very oppressive, especially if he's and like allowed to just freely W onto targets and then is playing around that with his ADC. There's definitely a lot of value to that, so I do think he maintains his spot within the beta at the moment. Karma is doing a bit better at the moment. I still think this champion struggles with its like fallback pattern later on into the game. The E has been buffed a decent amount of times, and it can definitely feel valuable if you're running something like the Echoes of Helia Moonstone variation. Obviously, when you're playing Karma, you want to play her as a very oppressive early laning support with like a Malignance, and if you can't really get those advantages, she really does lose a lot of her value. But being able to opt into some of these more supportive options can definitely help her, and I definitely think she is probably a higher B tier support now. Whereas, yeah, in the past she was definitely struggling with that secondary option and playstyle. Teemo, Galio, still within my B tier. Galio obviously struggles with the fact that he doesn't have great itemization for support, albeit he is a good support. Like, I think Galio as a standalone champion is a very solid option at the moment. He can be flexed across 2 different roles as well, and that is very valuable. So I think if you want to learn Galio into specific matchups, you definitely can find those spots and make him work. I do still think the biggest prohibiting factor of this champion, though, is his itemization and how he just struggles with it at the moment. Teemo is... I know people hate Teemo because of the frustration points, and they deem him like kind of unlaneable into certain things, and to an extent I agree. Like, I think Teemo is something you want to bring out very, very conditionally. Like, you want to play him into like double ranged or into comps which don't have a great answer to your shrooms and control, and don't have a great answer to your blind, because those are the key factors which you're usually playing Teemo for, especially when you are opting into him as a support option. But his scaling's really good. He's better in like plat and below, like those are the ranks I'd recommend playing him. Higher than that, like Emerald, Diamond, he does fall like down towards more like a C tier pick across most of his roles in general. I think top is the one where he like can still function up there, but can still struggle. Like, I think he just as a champion struggles for higher up you go, but I'd have him as a beta option for the moment. Wei, I still think can function as a solid support pick. His supportive output obviously got buffed more recently. The WW got had his shield amped for allies. That was nice, and it did help him as a support option. Obviously, the main reason you're playing Wei might not be for that. Like, you're playing him more as a damage support, which can shove waves, can trade more effectively, doesn't have the same level of restriction that maybe a farming Wei has to have. I think he's weaker in a non-farming role. I think you're just not getting access to the same level of gold or XP which you'd have mid, or just gold, which is why he is so strong as a bot laner. If you want to play Hwei anywhere, I'd recommend trying bot lane Hwei. Obviously, you're more traditionally going to play him as a mid laner, and I still think he's very strong there, but you should flex around and see where he can have value. But if you just like playing Hwei and you're open to playing different roles, support Hwei is fine at the moment. I'd say he's a solid B tier pick. Silas is conditional. He's great into those the matchups where you can get two really powerful ultimates and get a lot of value out of them. Maybe you're picking him into Ashur Varus. Maybe you're picking him into an Alistar, for example. There's definitely strength to Silas support. I think he is slightly weak than the bar at the moment, but only just. And I think if you're picking him in the right spots, he can definitely have a lot of value. Zoe, Rakan, and Bard wrap up my B tier. In Zoe's case, she can still be very oppressive early game and kind of akin to a LeBlanc support. If you get those early kills, get those early gold, get the ball going, these champions can feel really hard and really oppressive to play against. They do fall off. That is going to be one of the main factors of the LeBlanc and the Zoe. They need a lot of gold to function, and if you're dropping Magi stacks or you're not getting those early kills, they can feel really bad compared to a lot of the other pool. Even akin to a Lux, even, where she feels a lot worse to play than other support options when she doesn't get that gold. Obviously, she does have the Q, Zoe has the bubble, where they still have value, if they don't have a huge amount of gold, but they want it so they can do what they traditionally want to output within the game. Bard I have as a high B tier option. He's still able to play multiple styles. Whether you're looking for a bit more damage, you have the static Deadman's variation. Whether you're looking for a bit more durability, you still can just opt into Deadman's and a Kanic Rooken, for example, and some more supportive options, but maybe it's a Redemption or a Locket. I think Bard's in a pretty solid spot at the moment. He's a bit harder to play, which is why I have him as a B tier option rather than an A tier option, but he's, I think if you pilot him well, he can definitely climb the tier list, and playing around his burst damage can be a really key factor of the champion, but alongside obviously his roaming, which he's more traditionally known for. Rakan is not doing as well at the moment. The champion's obviously been for a bit of a roller coaster. He was really strong for a lot of last split, really being able to abuse the likes of Radiant Virtue and Shurelias when they were really strong items, or existing items, obviously. In this split, I say this split, back along he got nerfed. It tagged him more for average play. He's still a good competitive pick, and I still think if you are good at Rakan, he can still be a very valuable pick, and I think everyone should have Rakan as an option within their champion pool, but he's a bit on the weaker side at the moment. I'd have him as more a mid B tier option, maybe even a mid to low B tier option, so I'd have him around here. Moving on to the A tier then. Actually, no, I got one other champion moving down to the B tier, and that's Senna. Senna's been gradually doing worse over time. I liked Senna before because she had the two build variations of the Cleaver or the Echoes of Helia, but the direct tags and nerfs towards her have dragged her down. She struggles a lot more into certain matchups. The armor growth, I believe she lost, and the base armor, I think she lost both a bit, hurt her into the likes of Pike and those hook matchups where she was already performing quite badly into. She can function into enchanters and into melee supports, which don't really have the tools to punish her for playing aggressive and trying to reach for souls. But she's become a lot more conditional over time and is a pick I'm not going to really recommend as much at the moment, which is why I'm going to drop her down to the B tier. A tier champions. So I'm going to lead off with two A tier champions which I think are slightly overrated, and that is Brand and Leona. Well, in my opinion, are overrated, from what I've said about the champions. I think Leona's doing a lot worse at the moment. I think she's probably sitting towards a lower A tier option. Direct nerfs towards the champion have definitely tagged her over time. Brand, I had high because he was performing well in low elo, but direct nerfs to the champion have definitely tagged him for like those, because I usually aim for like a gold to diamond range, where gold and plat I would deem are still kind of towards the lower side, emerald diamond towards the higher side. He's definitely struggling a lot more in emerald to diamond at the moment, and I'd say that probably drops him closer down towards the B tier and even maybe C tier for like diamond, like the higher up you go within diamond. He's definitely a champion which scales pretty badly with rank, so I am going to leave him as a lower A tier option, possibly a B tier option. It really comes down to what your stance is on the champion at the moment. What else we got? So LeBlanc got nerfed this patch. She drops towards the lower A tier. She was already kind of here, but it wasn't a huge nerf. It actually hurts her ability to CS more than anything. Obviously, it's going to hurt her trading, losing 5 damage on Q. But support LeBlanc obviously really doesn't value levels as much. She really wants to just get kills and be able to snowball gold advantages as much as possible. And I still think she can do that. Support LeBlanc is easier, in my opinion, than mid LeBlanc, which is why I think support LeBlanc is better within low elo, because she doesn't need to focus on laning and it's more about just executing combos effectively. Obviously, if you're talking like plat gold, I think LeBlanc could probably drop onto the B tier. I still think she really thrives in like emerald diamond as like an elo range for support LeBlanc, but she can function in the higher elos and she can function in the lower, but you are going to need to put some level of games into her. She's not the champion which you can really just instantly pick up and find results on. Shaco, Fiddle, these are like some of the more gimmicky supports. They can sit like alongside the LeBlancs. I think they can really function quite well if played like if you understand your champion and play it well. They're not the kind of champions you're ever really going to first time in the support role. They require a decent amount of mastery to really find success here, but they really do what they do well. Like Fiddlesticks's ultimate is one of the strongest within the game. Shaco's ability to output like traps and control areas is also one of the best in the game, and I think if you play around these strengths of the champion, they can really thrive here. Obviously, if you don't, they do lose a lot of value, and that can be where you can argue why they should be lower down, or you can argue that their strengths make them really solid picks at the moment. Maokai, Sona, also within my A tier. I think Sona's actually... I had Sona towards the lower end of the A tier, possibly even like a B tier option. I think she's still an A tier option. I think I've kind of, like with other champions being nerfed, I think she once again rises back up as being like a solid A tier option. Obviously, people hate playing with Sona. Like, no one wants to play with a Sona because they deem her as being a really weak laner and someone who is very vulnerable to certain aspects and just doesn't have the same level of tools as certain other enchanters for like single target keeping a champion alive. Her AoE shields and healing though are really valuable. Her movement speed amp is great. I think she is actually better at laning than some people realize and like give her credit for. I think you can opt into like 3 points Q if you're looking to be really offensive in lane. Obviously, if you are playing her more back and like you want just the raw shield and HP, then you will put points into W. That is what people traditionally do. But there are ways of playing Sona, and I think she is not as bad as maybe I like had her in the previous patch. I think Maokai is fine as well. The 5 movement speed buff towards hit, just the straight up 5 movement speed buff and the flat HP helped him find his footing as a support again. And I think he sits as a solid A tier option. He is really easy to play as well. Like, he's one of the easiest tank options accessible to you. So I'd definitely recommend trying him and seeing if you can find success on the pick. Soraka, Zillion, also enchanter options. Well, I see enchanter. Zillion's, I think Zillion still classifies as an enchanter. He's more like a utility pick than anything, but he can still really be quite valuable in specific spots, especially champions which can really abuse movement speed. Like, Zillion Urgot, just from like personal experience, is a really fun and really strong combo where Urgot can consistently rotate passive procs, but things like Hecarim and like even just mages can function well with like a movement speed boost to like space more effectively. Soraka obviously is the go-to healing champion. Like, if you are looking for a champ which can output a huge amount of heals, maybe enemy team has a bad doesn't have a great way of accessibly picking up anti-heal without really without ruining their builds effectively, she can definitely find more strength there. She can also function well with like specific laners. Like Soraka Ashe is one which comes to mind as being a very strong lane, but primarily like off the Ashe being very oppressive, and then Soraka keeping her like alive while she is running people down. there is definitely strengths to that, and I think Soraka is a very solid A-tier pick at the moment. Milio, another enchant option here. I think Milio is also very strong with specific pairings, has a really good time with the likes of Kog'Maw, for example, and champions which can really abuse his W and like echoes of Helio rotations to output damage and absorb a lot of healing. Braum is a great response pick. He's a lot more conditional though, whereas I'd say some of these other champions are a lot better with like certain pairings. I think Braum's really good into specific picks, into like your Nautiluses, your Pikes, for example. Braum can really effectively nullify their ability to snowball and have picks within the game. So I think Braum can really thrive in those spots. He struggles into enchanters. That is where I'd really recommend avoiding playing Braum, but he can still really be a valuable pick towards your draft. Taric also within the A tier. If you hid the Riot API, most people would deem Taric weak, but the champion's not bad. He's obviously going to be a bit more predicated on compositions and pairings to really find his strength. Like Taric Nyla is always the one which is going to come to mind as being a really, really oppressive pairing, utilizing Nyla's passive and like close quarters combat with Taric can really give him a lot of value. So I think Taric, if you pick him with the specific pairings, really shoots up as one of the best supports in the game, but is obviously limited by that. Like if you pick Taric with duos which don't really like utilize his kit effectively, and he's into like a composition which he doesn't really benefit from, like his E or ultimate as well from, he can really struggle, and I think that is what justifiably drags him down the tier list slightly. I think Shen's still a really good support. I think like all three of these options are great like anti-engage picks. He's obviously a bit weaker with the passive nerf and the shield nerf, but he's still very strong against like Leona, for example, really shutting down the effectiveness of her and like her ability to just CC lock certain champions. So I think Shen can be really valuable within those aspects. That is the common one which comes to mind because it's the one which got him closest to seeing competitive play back when Leona was really dominant. Shen was being talked about as a good response pick. What else we got within the A tier? So, to wrap us up, we've got Xerath, Vel'Koz, and actually just Xerath and Vel'Koz. These are my two artillery options within the A tier. I think both of them can really, really be good, like effective carry options within the support role. Like they can output a huge amount of damage, primarily through base values. In Xerath's case, he wants to snowball a bit more, but Vel'Koz has really effective early game and base damage. The buffs he received more recently really helped him in the support role as well, more effectively being able to just ult on as like a chunk tool, or like more consistently and frequently even. His E having a shorter CD hurts champions which want to play into him, which is what he was weakest into. Like, you don't really want to pick Vel'Koz still into champions which can just like drop an ult on him and then engage, like your Nautiluses, your Leonas, for example. But he is definitely better, and I would say he's a really solid A tier pick at the moment. And then my S tier champions. So we have Janna, who is still an incredible pick. Great peeling tools, great enchanter outputs as well with like the ultimate and the E. Good disruption. I think she's in a really strong spot at the moment. Lulu, I would have as like a slightly lower down S tier pick. I think like Lulu, Zyra, Rel are like, and Lux are like lower S tier picks, whereas I'd say the other three are higher up. I'm actually just going to fill in the entire S tier here. So Zyra, great damage option, traditionally better within low elo. If you can effectively land like ultimates and get like plants which people can't really respond to within fights, combined with like her snaring capabilities, she can be really valuable there, and I think she's a great low elo DPS pick, especially with Brand doing a bit worse at the moment. Lulu's great for amping up on hit marksman and champions which can really synergize with her kit. Her polymorph is a really oppressive anti-carry ability, and her shielding and ultimate are great peeling tools. She's a really valuable support at the moment. Rel got buffed this patch, she's doing a lot better, now moves up as a really solid S tier option. They primarily went after her early game. So Rel pre-patch, like in 14.23, was actually shaped more towards her scaling, but they buffed her base HP, they buffed her passive, they buffed her W shield, and they buffed the W shield scaling HP, which is a huge amount of buffs to receive. She really went from being like a pretty bad support option to being a really good support option. I imagine she'll probably see competitive next season, and I think she's a really good option, especially if you like engage supports at the moment. Lux is a great snowballing burst mage. She can be really effective at harassing laners out, and with how popular Caitlyn is at the moment, she can really synergize quite well with her champion. Tom Kench got nerfed in a hotfix. They nerfed him by 3 armor. It's pretty placebo. It doesn't do a huge amount. Tom Kench is still a very strong champion within the support role. I think he probably deserved to be nerfed. He was, just overperforming there. It's not going to do enough to really like move him out. But it does drop him from like a mid S tier pick to maybe slightly lower S tier pick, because he's going to take a bit more damage, and that will shift him slightly. So it has relevance. If you want to play Town Kench support though, just play like Heartsteel into like Unending Despair. The build is so broken at the moment, and it really makes you basically just a raid boss from the support role. Right up with like a Spirits as a third item, and this champion is incredible at the moment. You can opt into things like Bloodsong or Slay as like your support option, and he is a great pick. He's my go-to support option in his current state. And then Nami and Poppy. So Nami, great as an enabler. Her E is one of the strongest abilities in the game. Being able to slow and add damage to a champion, like Brand, for example, is really oppressive. Obviously, in the past, she was more commonly paired with the likes of a Lucian, and albeit can still function with that duo, like, it's still very good at, like, doing what it wants to do, enabling Lucian to output a huge amount of damage, and, like, the two champions really spiking as good mid-game options, whilst having a decent laning phase. I do think she's more general, like, unlike Lucian, I think Nami at the moment is really benefiting from being more generalistically good with a lot of the pool, which is what I really think holds up as a good S tier pick. And yeah, I'd say she's really valuable in her current state. So I really do value her like a Nami, like a Janna, for example. Obviously not serving the same purpose, but I still think she is a very good enable option. And then Poppy got nerfed this patch, rightfully so. She was still #1 support. She stays as a good support option, probably sitting as more like a mid S tier option. But this is the first round of nerfs, realistically, which kind of shifted her. The other nerfs were pretty minimal. Like, they always try to do some sort of level of compensation, and don't get me wrong, they did this patch. They gave her 10% more AD ratio on the Q bonus AD, or 10% more bonus AD ratio on the Q. That combined with returning back the armor they took from her level 1 through level scaling, and that is, well, I mean, it benefits her. Like, she's stronger later on into the game than she was pre-patch. But obviously support is going to get less levels on average, and that is going to, be more of the game length than where the buff is really active from. So she is weaker in the support role. Great still as an anti-engage option though, and can output huge amounts of damage. She really does shine in those regards, but yeah, it is slightly lower down now, sits as more of an S tier option. And those are my thoughts. I do think there is a pretty solid variety of champions within the S tier, and I think, as always, with all these, like, most part for all these tier lists, you can make champions work, and you should, like, most champions work, and you should really play what is, like, you are good at. Not, like, the champions which I specifically say are in the S tier, because I think they can in certain spots be conditional, and I think you should really just focus on what you can play, and what you're really good at doing, whether you're like really good at playing around your carry as like an enchanter player, or whether you just enjoy having a bit more agency playing some of these carry support options. It really does come down to where your strengths lie as a person, and as a player rather. And those are my thoughts. Like, I do think this is a good S tier pool of options at the moment, and I really do recommend trying some of these champions out, as I do think on average they are going to be more performant than some of the ones in the tiers below. But yeah, those are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.